let us talk about, an automation topic. Let's dive into some important yet always very customer specific topics. And I definitely want you to ask questions so I can demonstrate different aspects. This is a little bit difficult simply because of the nature of the topic. You may have seen a demonstration of configuring my security policy to see when plug and play, for me it was a USB drive, was inserted into my quote unquote critical server. It's my laptop, but we're pretending my laptop is a critical server. And how, for a lot of Windows security, for example, you need to go to the internet and figure out how do I get this information into my security logs so that the Windows Server sensor can pick it up. And this is all about sensor installation. But now I want to talk about the other side, of let's make an automation rule, right? So I have already done this, right? I've already enabled the policy element, and I have these various events. Event ID 6416. How did I learn that event ID? Oh, I'm a Windows genius. No. I looked it up on the internet. All right. So now that I have an event ID, let's go in and let's go see. We can investigate. And initially, this is not something that will trigger an alert. The plugging in of a USB device. It's going to show up in the Windows event logs. And I can start, going back to the idea of searching. I can do a straight text search. And I have these, this thing. Actually, this one's weird. This was after class started. Why did it? I'll have to look at that. What got plugged into my computer after class started? Oh, interesting. Storage volume snapshot. So to look at that, what got plugged into my computer after class started? Oh, interesting. Storage volume snapshot. So some process ran. So these have happened in the past week, or I can look at the past whatever. Now, something that happened to me with a different point in time, I searched for this value, and it also matched a quad in an IPv6 address, which led me to scratch my head. So instead, what I did, I can search for it here and find event ID. It'll be there somewhere. Event ID, filter in. I can, one of those other tools. Hey, I can look on here, find out what the event ID is all about. Quick, keep your eye out for different little icons and stuff. All right. The one I'm personally more comfortable with, going under the specific raw event details, finding event ID, gobble it. And now I can make a search. To be honest, there's no wrong, right? You can do it the way I just did it. You can do it based on the event ID and copy and pasting from the individual include, exclude filters or whatnot, right? And then, taking that value and creating a saved query, which I have already done. Now, the thing that happens is if you start with, and this was the event ID that a year and a half ago was important, but as you become more comfortable with the system, you realize, I can just pull a field like event ID, and I want it to be this value, right? A half ago was important, but as you become more comfortable with the system, you realize, I can just pull a field like event ID, and I want it to be this value, right? Those become more comfortable. But my personal recommendation is that start with the query string. And in this particular case, depending on the demonstration, it's going to be one or the other. So I created my event ID. So that's my query. If I clear my search, everything turns out. And this is actually part of the workflow for creating a query, is you build a query and maybe, store it in some text file, right? Just to make sure you have it. I like Notepad++, it's just part of our workflow to begin to build these things. This is a very simple one, if we go to begin to build these things. This is a very simple one, if we, want, what was that one I built a little bit earlier? So this had the whole from Russia and not the destination to that specific network range. And, it actually doesn't matter. However, my advice to you is keep it simple and also start with queries. Once you get super confident, then you can start building it with the, names and stuff. Now that I have a saved query, what can I do with that? I can do so many things. For example, these are Windows events. These are not alerts, but maybe I want to be alerted when a USB drive is inserted into. What can I do with that? I can do so many things. For example, these are Windows events. These are not alerts, but maybe I want to be alerted when a USB drive is inserted into one of my critical servers. That was my inspiration for this entire example. If someone inserts a USB drive in your critical server, that can generate an alert and you'll know about it. And of course, being in the security industry for 15, 20 years, the whole USB drives in the parking lot, like, oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, let's go look at that. So I decided to figure out how to actually build that alert of when a USB drive is inserted into a server with the Windows Server Sensor installed. So the step one is, of course, enabling in your policy to detect it. And step two is building the query to see it. Step three, we'll go to automation. We will create an automation rule. Now, stepping back a moment, you do have a number of options. We do have these predefined templates for every alert that's on the system. Don't know if you really want to. I can't quite show it to you. I can't find it. But every alert that's on the system, we can have I guess 4624. That is probably not. Let's just go double check. No, I'm actually kind of curious why that one's showing up, because this is my system. This is not, where people are doing all kinds of crazy stuff on sales demo to demonstrate it. But in any case, every alert is kind of curious why that one's showing up, because this is my system. This is not, where people are doing all kinds of crazy stuff on sales demo to demonstrate it. But in any case, every alert is auto-generated into a template, so that if there is something that comes in from AWS CloudTrail, message class is, CloudTrail. Every time CloudTrail sends out one of its automated alerts, you can do something, usually send an email. So that's a quick thing you can build. But let's think about that USB option. So we're going to give it a name. We're going to have to think about it. And I will say right now, the hardest part about building automation rules is literally deciding what you want. Automation rules is literally deciding what you want in clear terms. Automation rules, once you know what you actually want. I want to be alerted every time someone plugs a USB drive into a critical server. Easy. I want an alert anytime something bad happens. What? You have to define it in terms. This is essentially GUI-based programming. You have to decide what it is that you want. And that is the hardest part about this whole process. So I have decided when a USB drive is inserted in a critical server, i.e. my laptop, I want to get alerted. So now I have to think about, okay, do I want to be alerted within 5 minutes of it happening? Or am I happy just knowing, once an hour that this thing happened somewhere? Some people do use this functionality essentially to create pseudo reports, which is fine. For some use cases, we just want to check every hour that whatever message did not come in or did come in, whatever the case may be. I'm not sure if we're going to run it daily. That's, again, getting to be more of a reporting function. But they're there. So every 5 minutes, the data processor is going to process this rule over selected tenants versus per tenant. So over selected tenants, this is the default here under tenant. Let me just blow this up a little bit. We'll see if it all works out. So we have our tenants. I can select, all the tenants. I can select specific tenant groups and then individual tenants. And now what over all selected tenants means is that all of the tenants will be treated as an entity. And if this event is found in one or more of those tenants, whatever action we configure will happen. Per tenant, and remember a tenant group is composed of multiple tenants. I can throw in some other tenants. Per tenant looks at each individual tenant, and if whatever we set as a trigger happens, then each tenant will be treated individually. And notice the kinds of reactions the system can take are a bit more limited because we are treating each tenant as an individual. So FYI, that is the difference of per tenant versus all selected tenants. It's just the nature of all selected tenants. Yeah, it's just the nature of the logic. No, in any case, in my very, very simplistic example, I'm going to select all tenants. The mute function, this is just kind of here after the rule has been created. We want to turn it off for a little bit of time because whatever reason, boom, quick mute. Perhaps one of the most important fields is what index do you want to look at? There's a reason why I spend so much time talking about indices, showing you, that there are these different indices, different kinds of data goes into different indices. Go look at the index definitions and details and think about what it is you want to do. Because indices default to alert. Indices default to alerts. In this use case, I want to create a new alert that does not currently exist in the alerts index. So if I run this rule on the alerts index, I'm never going to get a hit. But this is all about Windows, this very, very specific example. I need to run this rule against Windows events. Funny thing happened about a year and a half ago on a different system where I had created a rule, this very, very rule for detecting if a USB drive was inserted into a Windows system. And an unnamed systems engineer created a second rule as an example that looked for the exact same pieces of information, but only if they appeared in the alerts index. And then I'm teaching a class, I insert a USB drive into my laptop, and all of a sudden the user interface freezes because my rule generated an alert and my colleague's rule then generated a whole ton of alerts. We had to wait for it to time out. So you have to think about what the different components are going to interact. If we're just creating an email, fine, index alert, unless, of course, the data you're looking for doesn't exist in the alerts index. That's why I say in the 101 class, the index is how we organize the big data. So at this point, we have a name. We are going to interval every 5 minutes across all tenants. Oh, this needs to be the Windows index. And the trigger is going to be that USB query. So if in the Windows index, an event ID of either of these matches. Now, there can be fancy pants rules with calculations, and these get a little bit more complex. I don't know. We could spend an hour diving into this, and we simply don't have time. But you can, based on the results, do some other stuff, and you can do more complex stuff, and it gets pretty wacky pretty quick. So let's just keep it to if this thing shows up in the logs, either event ID 6416 or event ID 2003 in the Windows events logs. If this, I just generally call it happens once. If you want to see, does this happen 5 times in 5 minutes, greater than or equal to 5 times? If you're doing login kind of filters, we actually have a machine learning alert type that handles that situation, but maybe it's something else. You can require that the query get triggered some minimum number of times. But in my use case, I want to see whenever it happens. All right. So then I have my actions happen once. Email is a very, very simple action. And you have the option of, your data. What do you mean, your data? It means you dive into the data. And by diving into the data, which we will see in the next hour in terms of making dashboards, right? It's important that you look at your data. At the end of the day, it's all about the data. So in order to fill that requirement, in order to fill out what fields you might want in your email, you need to take a look at the data. Like what fields under details? What do I care about? Oh, do I care about class ID? Probably not. Unless I'm matching some machine stuff, I might care about engine ID name. I might care about class name, right? You have to understand your data in order to decide what fields you want. Let me just show you. All right, we'll take claim, right? You have to understand your data in order to decide what fields you want. Let me just show you. All right, we'll take class name. We'll pop this in, trigger hit, custom label. And now this CTX format, you can look it up online. But at this point, we can also do some cool stuff. Like what I tend to do is put some, old school. That's not where that goes. Actually, what I tend to do is pull it back into that text editor I love so much, and then tweak it a little bit. You can put some stuff in here like pre-class. I actually like a little bit of a. Yeah, that looks pretty. All right. You can. It's an HTML thing. It's going to show up in email. Yeah, that looks pretty. All right. You can. It's an HTML thing. It's going to show up in email. You can filter it, format it the way you like. Right. So that's what I like to do. But in this example, we're actually looking at creating an alert. When this thing happens to my server, I want an alert to show up under my alerts index or into my alert index or show up on my dashboard. That's what I'm going for right now. All right, so now I have to think a little bit more. All right, when this happens, what is the appropriate kill chain stage? And my personal preference is actually to work backwards because I can go off to MITRE and look up this stuff, and it's easier to go backwards. And I kill chain stage. And my personal preference is actually to work backwards because I can go off to MITRE and look up this stuff, and it's easier to go backwards. And actually, let me just show you the one I did. Much like a test kitchen, I have the recipe, and then I have a baked cake right now. So all the stuff I talked about, USB inserted, run every 5 minutes over selected tenants, and specifically the tenant my customer, as opposed to all tenants. Same query. I'm reusing that query. Reuse, reduce, recycle. I care if it happens once. And I actually started, what is the appropriate MITRE information for USB drive inserted? And commonly it's about, replicating malware across an air gap or whatnot. So I thought, all right, that's what I want it to be. Then from there, I worked back up. Okay, that's lateral movement. And lateral movement is a part of propagation. It was actually easier to go backwards than it was to figure out, oh, this must be propagation. What do I want? Now, the other thing I did was create tags, make a little bit more big deal of this in the 101 class when we talk about the alerts and these tags. This is part of our deal for extending the alerts information. And in this case, we see training. If I delete this is my same training session. If I training DP, if I delete this alert, then after a couple minutes, it'll remove from here. Do not go crazy with your tags. Have some organizational measure, some control over what tags you're going to create. Now, the last bit is fidelity and severity. So we talked about severity is based on how nasty this particular alert is. It is roughly related to kill chain stage and tactic and technique. And then fidelity is confident. Now, in the real world, you choose your values, and you're probably going to set these to be identical. If you've chosen the value 50, you set it for both. But I'm not doing that, so I can show you what happens if you don't set those values that way. Which is, because this was already set, I go to alerts and I set USB. Oh, okay, I've been talking a lot. So last 5 hours, and I plugged in a USB drive around 7 p.m. 7 p.m. 19 minutes past. So notice my severity is 50, my fidelity is 80, and the alert score is given a 58. Remember how alert score is based on severity and fidelity, which is great if there is some algorithm running under it, but if it's a rule, generally whatever you want the alert score to be, set your fidelity and your severity to be the same value. So that is a practical example of creating an alert or also emailing yourself an alert with all of the little messy details and whatnot. There is a question, what if I want to create a playbook using different indices, syslog, traffic, Windows event, in a single rule? Is it possible? What you would do is create multiple individual automation rules. That is the solution. You create multiple rules for each index. And now there is a playbook there's a question in the chat about seeing the creation of a playbook with correlation type. That's a bit difficult just based on my data. I don't have any good correlation stuff to do a correlation search, but functionally it works the same way, right? If we go in And if I actually had something that I could show you for a correlation, now we set the correlation, we load a saved correlation. There are some, yeah, I don't even have any correlation templates on the system just because I don't have any good data to show anything interesting about correlation. But it works essentially the same way. I'm going to, if we're talking about one of our pre-built correlations, for example, let me go find the name. And I am doing this particular demonstration completely live without any planning, so I might get surprised. All right, so internal exploited vulnerability. No worries. I'm kind of curious where this is going to go. So internal exploited vulnerabilities. This is one of our built-in correlations, which means I can come in here, maybe mostly internal. Hey, there it is. Excellent. I can find that. And now if that thing happens, I can seriously do not create an alert on here. Maybe mostly internal. Hey, there it is. Excellent. I can find that. And now if that thing happens, I can seriously do not create an alert on something you're reading from the alerts index, but maybe make an email. But I think your bigger question is, creating a rule based on a correlation query. And logically, it's exactly the same thing, right? Whether I use a basic query or whether I, like the one on my system, this one was easy. Now, that's a query. Or a correlation query is essentially a set of queries on different indexes looking for different matching. And how many times do I need to see that happens? And what do I want to happen? What do I want? What and what do I want to happen? What do I want? What action do I want triggered in case this query is matched however many times in the period? So I apologize. I don't have any good data to show a correlation query, let alone a good correlation rule, but logically it works the same way. All right. So, and then to the question to Anonymous, did the making multiple rules answer explain the question? I mean, it's not as if, one, you're going to create the query. Two, the system's going to have to run that query over the different indices. So even if, like, you have a firewall with a group, the firewall still makes a ton of rules under the hood. Maybe the management is a little bit easier, but it is what it is. But I'm happy to, answer more later.